Hey, it's Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. and today we are talking about Root, the Marauders expansion. And Root, at day one, not even day one, we're like less than a day in, and we're at 10,000 backers, $875,000 raised. I feel quite confident that my crossing $1 million prediction is going to be just fine here. In fact, I think the only real question at this point is comparing it to Root the Underworld, which made $1.7 million. Will this one beat that out? Because, I mean, $800,000 raised in the first few hours is a lot, but you also get a lot of front-loaded people in these campaigns, especially Root, which has spent time and attention building up an incredibly devout fan base who loves this game, who adores this game. And for myself, as many critiques as I do have against Root, as many complaints as I have as to why it is a flawed game, as to why I don't like certain things about it, I still have it and plan on getting more for it because it's still a game that I enjoy, complaints and critiques aside. And so, let's go into it. What is this game? What's going on here? And let's just start from the beginning. What is Root? For those who don't know, and timestamps down below so you can skip to any relevant section, but for those who don't know, Root is going to be an asymmetric war game disguised as a cute little woodland creatures game. I say disguised because if you walk in thinking this is going to be light and fluffy, you will be sorely disappointed. This is a tactical game of running your faction according to its unique way that it plays, unique way that it wins. This is not asymmetry the way many games design asymmetry. Look, you have a unique starting faction and you have your own abilities. Look at that. No, the game plays entirely different. You have your own abilities, your own sequences, your own way you play. The game does give you a common structure from daylight, birdsong, evening, all these commonalities so you can at least understand the process of each faction. But past that, they play completely different. From giant factions with armies such as the moles or the cats to just walking around the map like the Vagabond, that's the one. I couldn't figure out the name there. And so every single faction in Root is going to have its own unique way that it plays, its own unique puzzle that you have to figure out. And not just a puzzle you have to figure out in and of itself, but rather a puzzle you have to figure out in combination with the other factions on the table, how they play, how they operate. Root presents a puzzle that you and the other players are slowly navigating your way towards, or navigating your way around, as you figure out that the rats have to stop the Iries have to stop the moles, and the Vagabond has to get in the way here. But if Vagabond gets too strong, then the cats have to pivot, and then the Iries will attack the moles still, because we want to attack the moles. Meanwhile, the moles are still sitting there trying to figure out how to get to their objectives. Everything in this game is different, and the game's going to ultimately play until someone hits 30 points. That is one of the commonalities they have. But the way you hit 30 points is going to be very different. You're going to have some commonalities, like taking out enemy tokens is going to be a commonality, crafting equipment will be a commonality. There's going to be different things that will give you standard points, but then every faction has its own unique way where it's likely going to score the bulk of its points in this game. And that is effectively Root, a asymmetric game of navigating the politics and the tension and the abilities of four different factions. And then there was an expansion. The river folk and the lizard folk and the river thingamajiggy, those factions, yes, definitely those ones. So that first expansion gave you the first expansion gave you two new factions that mixed up the puzzle, and if not for those additional factions, Root would be gone from my collection. I mentioned at the beginning of this video that I have problems with Root, and it is true. I have many complaints and problems with Root, and the idea of a pre-scripted formulaic process that you just play again and again and again until every player figures out the role they need to take, removing any degree of real player agency from the game and just falling into a pre-scripted role. The more factions you have to mix that up, the more factions you have that give it a constantly fresh experience. So, sure, you figured out the Irie versus the Vagabond versus the cats. The cats are called the something else, by the way, the Marquis. The Marquis versus the, I can't remember the last faction either, versus the Woodland Creatures, whatever, the Woodland Alliance. That's a scripted game, but if you keep on mixing it up, it'll constantly change. And I know I'll have plenty of people in the comments telling me it's not scripted, and it's not. There's player agency, but you're still playing your role to a degree. But for me, Root has always been and will always be about the additional factions that this game gives you, about the additional puzzle, the state that this game continues to give. And from the initial expansion they had way back in the day, all the way to the Underworld expansion, which brought in 20,000 backers and 1.7 million, to the Marauder expansion that we have now, bringing in 10,000 people day one and 876,000, likely going to cross that $20,000 mark, likely going to cross 2 million. Root is continuously delivering new things. And so speaking of which, what is the Marauder expansion bringing to the table? The Marauder expansion is bringing to the table a few different pledge options, but it's bringing in two main things. Let's call it three main things. It's bringing you a new variable setup. It's bringing you the two new factions, which are also primarily suited for two-player gameplay as well. So they can play regular player counts and whatnot, but if you are someone who has not really wanted to get into Root because you're not interested in playing with the Clockwork expansions, or like I'm not interested, I don't want those autonomous factions or whatever, and if you're primarily playing at a two-player, well, there's giving you two new factions that are going to do well at two-player counts, so factor those in. Additionally, it's going to give you these under factions, these hirelings, which are an entirely new way to play, where you can basically build up your influence and spend them on these mini factions and their mini abilities, as well as the fact that it's also balanced towards a two-player game, but it's balanced at different player counts as well, giving you more and more influence to spend the further behind you are in the point track. So both a catch-up mechanic as well as additional miniature factions in play. And so those are going to be the three main things it's giving you. Setup, two new factions, and a whole bunch of hireling factions that give you new ways to play, to mix up your game, and to fill out a two-player game as well. Again, to be very clear, playable at higher player counts as well. They're not exclusive. These hirelings are not exclusively for lower player counts, so I know I focus very heavily on how this game will round out your two-player experience, and that is true, but not exclusively rounding out your two-player experience. It will give you more content across the board with a bit more of a catch-up towards that two-player experience. And as far as the pledge levels here, and what you specifically get, for $80, that's not true. For $50, you get a total value, a total MSRP, keyword there's MSRP, of $80, and you're going to be getting the Root Marauders expansion, which will have a $50 MSRP. This is standard for Root. Their games typically have a $50 MSRP and sell online for around $42, $43. It's going to give you those two new, that $50 expansion, or that $50 pledge, and the $50 MSRP expansion is going to give you the Keepers and Iron expansion, which is giving you the Badgers. The Badgers are very slow moving, but also armored, so they are protected. They can remove an additional hit, and their goal is to get these artifacts, and you have to balance that across the fact that they are slow moving. So you're slowly carting these artifacts towards your home, and then trying to get them all while factoring the fact that you are basically a sitting duck along the way. Then there's the Lord of the Hundreds, the rat folk that both come with their own individual rats, as well as the Lord of the Rats is going to be marauding them across the map. They are all about war. They are all about combat. They are basically setting fire to the board slowly but surely, and fire is a literal thing. Opponents will have an opportunity to clean up after them, so to speak, by taking out their fire. So as they go rampaging around the board, they are also giving their opponents easy points to get to effectively keep them in control. And so you have to balance that, constantly moving forward while potentially protecting yourself, but not so much. And it's a balance. So we have one heavily defended, slow-moving faction that's all about equipping artifacts, all about getting artifacts, or alternatively, you have this very, very war-centric faction, which is great when you want to mix up, these Lord of the Hundreds versus the Marquita Cat versus the Moles. And so that's going to give you the two new factions there. Additionally, it's going to give you 4 hirelings: the Forest Patrol, the Last Dynasty, the Spring Uprising, and the Outcast. 3 of those will look very similar to factions that are already in play. Many of the hirelings in this expansion, many of the hirelings in Root the Marauders are going to reflect existing factions as well, and then additionally some others thrown in. So it's not just new factions, it's not just versions of factions, but it's going to be both versions of factions as well as individual hireling expansions or hireling units or whatever. Then from there, you're also going to get the Riverfolk hirelings. For a $20 estimated MSRP, you're going to be getting the Riverfolk Flotilla, the Warm Sun Prophets, and the Rowdy Crowd, which is not really revealed, but again, 2 more based on factions and 1 additional. And then that last $10 with the MSRP is going to be the Landmarks pack, which seems like a fun way to play. If you've ever played King of the Hill in Root, then you know that just having a small minor objective that drives forward your experience can totally mix up the gameplay. And these landmarks seems like it's going to give you that. It's going to give you additional things that go on the board that shift up the way you play, shift up your objective, shift up what is driving you forward, you and the other players, and the way you play that game. And that's going to be, again, $50 for $80 with MSRP. We'll come back to the whole should you back it after we're going through all the pledge levels. For $80, you get basically everything that you got before, which is going to give you an additional $30 of cost, but an additional $50 of MSRP, and that's giving you the More Hirelings expansion, which is basically an expansion with a $50 estimated MSRP. That's giving you 6 new hireling factions. We're going to have 2 reflecting the factions, the Raven Spies and the Sunwood Expedition, and then 4 unique ones, the Traveling Band, the Protector, the Badger, and the Rat. So the Badger and the Rat will also reflect existing factions, and the Traveling Band, the Protector, will reflect their own unique whatever it is. And then for $110, which is an additional $30 of cost, an additional $40 of MSRP, is going to give you the Clockwork Expansion 2, which is, again, just more Clockwork entities you can play with Root. If you're not familiar with the Clockwork expansions, they're already really is the Clockwork Expansion 1, and what the Clockworks do basically is they give you these automated factions that can take the part of any living player, but they have their own rule set of how they play the game. So if you want to have a 4-player game of Root with only 3 players, the Clockwork Expansion will give you that experience. And this is giving you the Clockwork Expansion 2, which is going to give you the automated faction from the Riverfolk and Underworld, as well as new trait cards for the factions and whatnot. And that is basically going to be the 3 pledge levels on the table for Root. As far as should you back or should you not, let's go through it. So to begin with, let's take a look at the Underworld expansion, because the Underworld expansion is a good reference point for seeing what they've offered in the past and how that played out in practice. And so for $50 here, for $50 in the Underworld expansion, you got $90 worth of MSRP. So you got more MSRP out of it, but still $50. But let's take a look at the aftermarket cost as well. So $50 brought you the Underworld expansion, which is base MSRP of $50, the Exiles and Partisans deck for $10, the Vagabond deck for $10, and the Resin Clearing Markers for $20. Now, while that is $90 of MSRP, the net aftermarket from online stores is somewhere in the range of $75. And shipping on this was $10 to the US. Factor in, it will be variable depending on where you're actually coming from, so I'm just covering the US shipping, but that will be variable depending on where you are. And so effectively you are paying $60, $50 plus 10 to get roughly $75 worth of retail. So you got it sooner, you supported the company, and you got a discount. All in all, I would say that's a solid win. And so that's what you got for Root over there back in the Underworld expansion. The problem is things are changing here for 2 reasons. First of all, $50 no longer buys you $90 worth of MSRP, it buys you $80 worth of MSRP, which is a big difference. Additionally, the shipping is going to be $15 to the US instead of $10. So now you're effectively paying $65 for roughly $65 worth of content. Potentially even a little less. Once you factor in some SRPs, you're potentially paying around $65 for roughly $63 worth of retail content. Let's call it 65 for 65 because you have to factor in those taxes, the state-by-state taxes, maybe even 65 versus 67. So now the math has changed slightly. I'm not saying don't get it, not in the slightest, but you're certainly not getting the same deal you were getting before. That $50 expansion is going to be $42, $43. These $20 MSRP and this $10 MSRP will be like $7 and like $14, $13 respectively. You're going to be walking away with roughly $65 of value. It'll vary by store, it'll vary by the taxes you pay, but roughly $65 of aftermarket cost and paying that much to get it. So you're still supporting the company. At the end of the day, more money is going to go to Leader Games when you back their game on Kickstarter than when you buy it in retail. So if you want to support Leader Games, still a good reason to back it. If you want to get more content faster, still a good reason to back it. If you want to get a discount compared to retail, not so much on that basic pledge level, at least not the basic pledge level. Now, when we move up a notch, it's good news and bad news, because for $30, you're getting a $50 MSRP expansion. And if you look at their prior expansions, again, looking at retail pricing or whatever it is in the actual online stores, that's roughly $42 of cost. So for that additional $30, you're getting a $42 worth of cost, which is a good deal, assuming your shipping doesn't go up too much to match that. That is a good deal. The flip side, and this is the part I have a slight problem seeing how it'll play out, is a $50 MSRP for 6 hirelings. It seems to be expensive. I could be wrong. I don't know exactly what's included in the hirelings. I don't know how many tokens, how many meeples, but based on what the hirelings are bringing to the table, a $50 MSRP for 6 hirelings and nothing else does make me a bit skeptical. Now, they're saying it's a $50 MSRP, so we'll have to see. So on the next pledge level, which, by the way, is the one I'd probably most recommend, you're paying effectively an extra $30 to get $42 worth of retail pricing, assuming that retail pricing is accurate, which I mean, again, they're saying it is, but it's also very little content compared to that MSRP. And that's going to be that faction, that pledge level. So far, the $80 pledge level is the one I would most recommend. Although, again, even the basic one's not bad. It's just not as good as it was in the Underworld expansion, in the Underworld Kickstarter. And then finally, for $110, that additional $30 is getting you an additional $40 of MSRP, but that $40 of MSRP will be roughly $30 of pricing. If you look at the previous Clockwork expansion, it's roughly $30, so you're paying more, getting the same as what you'd be able to get. So it's the same argument there as well, that assuming it doesn't up your shipping, you're basically giving more money to Leader Games and getting it faster. Still not a bad reason to back, but still not a great reason to back. And factor in, for all these options I just gave you, the downside as well is the fact that you are giving up your money a year in advance to get the game a year from now. So that is a factor. You have to decide for yourself how much that matters to yourself. And that ultimately is going to be the breakdown of the costs of Root. Past that, speaking for myself, let's take a look at who's backing at what. So we currently have 588 backers at the Marauder Pledge. We have 2,400 backers at the Marauder Pledge with more hirelings, and we have 5,835 backers at the All the New Stuff. Leader Games, for whatever you want to say about them, they have done a good job building a cult following around an incredibly popular game. I mean, 5,835 backers, day one, jumping in at $110. To be clear, that means 5,000 people here are so devoted to Root that they want the Clockwork expansion. That they are not just playing Root, they're not just in love with Root, but they are willing to play or want to play with the automated factions as well. That is... It's impressive. I mean, say what you will, it is impressive. And that basically is a wrap. That's the whole should you back it, should you not. Ultimately, oh, and then the plushie. The plushie won't hold its value at all, or at least I assume it won't. Honestly, I shouldn't say anything about that because I don't know what the aftermarket is on selling a stuffed animal for a board game. I could ask, Awakened Realms. Awakened Realms and Leader Games, and probably a few other companies have successfully sold plushies for their games. Lastly, I'll say check out Lord of the Board. I'll throw a link down below, but Lord of the Board had an excellent breakdown of all the new stuff in the expansion, of all the new content. I believe he was the only person to have gotten a prototype content or whatnot, so go ahead and check out his channel. He's a great channel, by the way. I've been following him for a while. Puts out a ton of good stuff, deep dives into games. If you want, a breadth of all the coverage in the world, that's not the channel to go through. But if you want deep dives into a variety of games, including Root, then you should definitely check out Lord of the Board. He is bringing it to the table. Past that, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, have a good one.